Okay, I'm going to adjust this just slightly. All right, so today we need to talk about services marketing, and then we need to, I need to remind you that next week is reserved for you to work on your article reviews, so you'll have the class periods, we will not meet next week. So you have the time, if you've already done your article review and submitted it, well, then it'll be like a spring break that you didn't get for you since they canceled spring break and gave us an extra week for Christmas. So just remember that we won't be meeting face-to-face or online next week. It'll be given, that time is given to you to work on your articles. So find an article. If you have questions about the article, probably the fastest way to get me is to text me at 405-414-7054. I can look at stuff pretty quickly if it's on my phone. It's harder for me to look at email, and it's just more clunky, so I prefer text. So just a reminder about that. If you have questions, legitimate sources are the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, business publications like Forbes magazine, things like that are all legitimate sources. But if you have a question about a website, just feel free to send me a text. I'll look at it and get back to you pretty quickly. All right, so services marketing. Services are intangibles, and they are becoming an increasingly more important part of our economy, right? When we talked about global trade, 75% of the world's trade, and we are no longer capable of producing everything that we need as a nation on our own, and haven't been for some time, so global trade is really important. 75% of that is tangible goods, things like the shirt that I'm wearing. It was probably manufactured by a lovely, USA, American flag polo was probably manufactured, I think I looked at the tag this morning, in China, right, and shipped over here. So 75% of global trade is these tangibles, only 25% is in services. But when we get to the United States economy, it's exactly flipped, right? 25%, we produce 25% of tangible goods and services, or goods, and 75% of what we produce is actually in services. And that number is going to increase globally, in the future as things become more and more automated, and we can produce them faster and faster. We're going to shift towards more services economies, right? And that's where the real value in our economy certainly is. So services scholars like Mary Jo Bittner argue that all goods are really services. So again, this is an example of that sort of solipsistic attitude that people have. So I told you that brand scholars last time, like Kevin Lane Keller, argue that the most important decision a business will make will be their brand. And I said, it's an important decision, but it's not the most important decision. Because if you have really great branding and a really crappy product that nobody wants to buy, you're still going to go broke, and you're not going to survive. But can you think of one thing that is a product that, and what she means by this, and this is again a very solipsistic attitude, is I'm a services scholar, that's what Bittner would say, and we really don't value anything in and of itself. What we value is what it provides for us. So for example, this iPhone, I'm not like Gollum in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, who values the ring, my precious, for itself. He gets this ring, he values the ring in and of itself. He's addicted to the ring, right? And we don't look at like the iPhone and think that. You don't like go, oh, it's so beautiful, I just want to sit here and look at it. What do I value the iPhone for? Well, I value it so that I can text with people that are in the extended class section if they want to participate in the classroom activities. I value the mouse that's sitting on the table there for the ease with which it allows me to navigate the operating system and the apps that are on that computer, right? I mean, that's a tangible product, but I don't really want the product in and of itself. What I want is what it allows me to do, which is a service, right? That product is actually providing a service. This product is actually providing a service in that I use it so that I can communicate, I can text, I can take pictures, I can send them to Facebook, things like that. I want it for what it does for me. Can you think of anything that we might value in and of itself and not for the service that it provides? I can think of one. That you value for itself and not for the service that it's going to provide you. It's 8 o'clock, I know. It's hard. The only thing that I can think of that maybe you value in and of itself is art, right? You value art for the sake of itself. You value it a priori for what it is, not necessarily the service. But Bednar would probably say, well, even art, what do you value it for? You value it, you put it on your wall, and you value it for the decor it provides in your home, right? But I think you can value an art object for its own sake in and of itself. So $722 billion in services were exported in 2014. That amount is obviously 2014. We're now in 2021. It's only increased, right? I mean, it's a huge percentage of our economy that we're exporting in terms of services. So when we talk about marketing, we organize the marketing discipline around the 4 Ps: product, price, place, and promotion, right? That's how we tend to think of the discipline of marketing, as being organized around these 4 interrelated concepts, right? What is it that I'm trying to sell? The product. Well, it can be a service. It can be intangibles like friendship. I mean, when I talked about at the beginning of the semester, we all market constantly. We market to our friends. We want people to like us. We give of ourselves, and we don't necessarily get monetary rewards, but we get something back, right? So that can be a product. These friendship can be thought of as a product in terms of marketing. So we've got these ideas that we can, when we talk about products, we can also include sort of these intangibles, these ideas, this intellectual property, things like that are also of value. And intellectual property has monetary value. Friendship, maybe not so much, but it has some kind of intrinsic value, right? Well, when we talk about services, these intangibles, we also add to it this idea of the 4 I's of services, the unique aspects of services. So what are the 4 I's of services? Intangibility, inconsistency, inseparability, and inventory. We'll talk about each one of these in a little bit of depth. And remember that these are all important, and they relate to the assessing of services quality. So, intangibility. Services generally cannot be held, touched, or seen before the purchase decision is made. Generally, you can't really evaluate them before you make the purchase decision. This can lead to problems in performance, right? Because services tend to be performance-based. And that leads to problems with credence aspects that are difficult to evaluate, maybe even after the purchase has been made. So some services are completely intangible. You'll never, ever touch them. That makes them really difficult to evaluate, even after you've purchased them. And so one of the things that I ask students is, for example, before I became a marketing professor, I was a lawyer. I was a lawyer for UCO. I was a lawyer for a publicly traded company. After that, I went into the private sector. How do you evaluate a lawyer's services? You gotta speak up.
By the success of trying to do it.
By the
By
what?
the success of like
By the success, how do you define success for a lawyer?
it's like the best possible situation given.
Okay. The best outcome possible given the situation, all right?
And it may not always benefit the customer.
It may not always benefit the customer. Why not?
Because of the, it depends on what side you're trying to, I don't know, like it depends on what side you're trying to argue.
Okay.
Is it trying to discriminate?
All right. Vitaly says, if the lawyer fixed your problem, then the service was good. If you still owe a lot of money and he just pretended like he was doing a good job, then he was bad. If you do that as a lawyer, by the way, you can file a bar complaint. If I charge you a huge amount of money and I don't at least try to help you, you can file a bar complaint, and then you can be disbarred for doing that. So generally, lawyers don't just pretend; they actually do something. But what do we generally think of lawyers as doing? What is it on the law shows that you see them doing? Divorces. Okay, there's a divorce court. One of my employees in our family business loves all of these stupid court drama, pseudo real cases, right? Divorce court, that is all been fictionalized off of real divorce cases, because people on television don't really have the power to grant you a divorce. This is a legally binding contract that can only be broken in reality by a legitimate sovereign governmental entity, which is a state court, right? Divorce is a product of state court. So the divorce court, she likes to watch divorce court. I walk in and she'll be, watching divorce court. She cooks for our restaurant. There's a television in the kitchen, and she'll be watching divorce court. And that's completely fictionalized. Now, some of them are what we call binding arbitration. The first one of these court television series that came out was called The People's Court with Judge Wapner, who was a retired judge. And people would actually agree to drop their case in small claims courts across the country and go have them heard in front of him. That's what we call binding arbitration. It's like a private legal process. Judge Wapner at that point in time wasn't really a judge. He was a retired judge, right? And these people agreed to go on television and have their disputes. And that program spawned, the People's Court spawned a whole little cottage industry of these courtrooms. So the next one that came along that was really, really popular after Judge Wapner, probably more popular than Judge Wapner, is Judge Judy, right? And I absolutely hate Judge Judy because I think she was absent the day they taught law in law school, because she has some of the most interesting rulings that I've ever heard in my entire life. But again, not wonderful. But what do these sort of highlight? What did you say? What do these shows highlight? So you said divorce. What else? What is it sort of?
Disputes.
Okay, disputes, right?
Like speeding ticket ones. I've seen some funny speeding tickets.
Okay, so what most people think of lawyers as doing is going to court and help you settle disputes. And hopefully, at the end of that, you win. And a dispute in a legal context can be a dispute between you and another individual, like the People's Court So these are disputes between individuals. They focus on mostly contract cases, but also some minor tort cases and things like that. But you can also have disputes basically between you and the government. That's criminal law, if you want to think of it that way, right? So if you get a ticket, right, out here in the parking lot, we have, by the way, here at UCO, we have a larger police force than the Republic of Bolivia. And, you know, I mean, it's just incredible to me, like, why do we need, you know, when I was the Associate General Counsel here, in the Office of the Lead Counsel, why is it that we have more police officers, for UCO than, I was at the time, when I was first hired, I was vice mayor in the city of Guthrie, and literally UCO's police department is bigger than the police department of the city of Guthrie. And how much area does UCO's police department have to patrol? It's like not even a square mile, right? How big is Guthrie? Guthrie is like 15 square miles. And UCO is this larger police force than Guthrie. So you're going through the parking lot out here and you get a speeding ticket, right? On one of our little roads that have, like, what's the speed limit inside campus? I think it's on the parking lots and the little pseudo roads that we have. I think it's 15 miles an hour. And you're going, you know, 18 miles an hour, and they give you a ticket. What do you want the lawyer to do? Well, you want them to help you in this dispute because you don't think you should be stopped because your speedometer, I mean, how many of you, this is a little bit different in this day and age because most people now have a digital speedometer, so you can actually tell on most cars now how fast you are actually going. But can you really tell on the old speedometers? And most cars still have the old-fashioned kind that have an arm that goes up. Can you really tell the difference between, say, 15 miles an hour and 16 or 17? It's really hard, right? So you want the lawyer to help you at least get it reduced so that it doesn't go on your insurance. Get you something like a deferred sentence so that, you know, you pay a fine, you then do a probationary period or you go do defensive driving, and that won't go on your record. And if they do that, you think they've done a good job. Let's take more complicated cases. How do you evaluate the lawyer's performance in a more serious criminal case? Let's say murder, right? So murder is defined at the common law as the unlawful killing of a human being with malice aforethought. So this is what we call an elements test in law. So murder is defined as unlawful killing two, human being, three, malice aforethought. All right, so these are the elements of murder. This is what the prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in order to convict you of murder. One, that it's an unlawful killing. What does unlawful killing mean? Well, it's one that isn't sanctioned by law. So what kinds of killings are sanctioned by law?
I don't know how this law applies in Oklahoma, but in Texas, there's like, if someone's trespassing on your property, you have to have like a warning shot first that you can shoot them. if they're
Oh, okay.
trespassing.
All right. I'm not sure that that's the law in Texas, but it's not the law in Oklahoma, I can tell you that. You can't shoot people on your property for trespassing. You can shoot them if they're
Like
threatening you, right? If they break into your home and they're threatening you, you can shoot them. We love guns in Oklahoma. We're fascinated with the Second Amendment, and we absolutely think that you should be able to defend yourself and your family. Okay, so again, somebody says, Vitaly says, if the lawyer stays on your side to the end of the case, no matter what, and you're trying to save you, then they're a good lawyer. I think I like that comment, and I'll tell you why, because in a minute we'll talk about sort of win-loss ratio. But so you're suggesting that if you're acting in self-defense or defense of something, you can kill somebody, that's justified, right? But so they charge you, let's say they charge you with the unlawful killing of a human being with malice aforethought, and you say, no, I was defending myself. They came into my home. That's what we call an affirmative defense, and the lawyer's gonna have to argue the affirmative defense, right? Like, no, they were in my home, they had a weapon, they were threatening me, I was justified in killing them. Now, various states have different rules about that. Some states require before you kill somebody else in self-defense, you have an affirmative duty. This is not the case in Oklahoma. You have an affirmative duty to what we call retreat to the wall, which means that you have to attempt to escape until the point at which you can't, and at that point, then you're allowed to defend yourself. Not in Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, if they threaten you, you're allowed to stand your ground and shoot them, right? So that's an affirmative defense. Let's suppose that there's these cases like the Trayvon Martin. You all probably remember this case in Florida. A young African-American male is walking in a neighborhood where this person who is doing neighborhood watch believes that he shouldn't be, predicated pretty much largely on the color of the victim's skin, right? I mean, it was fairly clear to me. And George Zimmerman, of course, is charged with some crime. The guy who kills Trayvon Martin was charged with this crime. And he says, oh, no, I was acting in self-defense, right? I think it's clear he wasn't. But a jury believed it, right? He was not convicted of that crime. So in that instance, the lawyer did a good job, right? I mean, we have an objective standard. He won the case. In my mind, clearly, George Zimmerman, and he was in trouble with the law after that for multiple. I mean, seems to be a very violent person. But his lawyer, he'd say, well, I did a good job, right? And got him off. So students in my classes oftentimes say, well, you measure the effectiveness of a lawyer based on win-loss ratio, right? If they win more than they lose. Now, some of the dumbest, when I was in law school, some of the dumbest people in my class, I went to Oklahoma City University. My parents could not figure, both my brother and I were admitted to OU. We both chose to go to different law schools than OU. He went to the University of Tulsa. I went to Oklahoma City University, both of which are private schools, far more expensive than OU. When I was in law school, and this was years and years ago, I've been a lawyer for a long time now, law school tuition without fees was $950 a credited hour. You had to have 90 hours to graduate. That's a lot of money. That didn't include books and fees, right? So you're looking at an enormous amount of money to go to law school. Fortunately for my brother and I, our parents were able to help with a good portion of that. They paid for all of our undergraduate. My mother paid for all of my master's. I had to take out a small amount of loans on my JD, but they helped, right? A lot of my law school classmates were not that fortunate. And some of these individuals that were stupid, they were really not bright people, were taking out huge amounts of loans, and they had planned on going to work as district attorneys in Oklahoma. At that point in time, assistant DAs, ADAs, what we call ADAs, assistant district attorneys, the starting salary, I think, was something like $37,500 a year. Now, if you cannot figure out that you're going to spend and probably come out of law school with $100,000 in debt or more, if your parents aren't helping you out, if you can't figure out, if you can't do the maths on this and figure that you cannot afford to take that job, and yet they did, as ADAs, and pay your law school tuition, student loan debt, if you can't figure that out, you are a candidate for natural deselection, in my opinion. And yet these people have wonderful win-loss ratios. Why is that? Because criminals are more stupid than they are, right? Had a case one time. My client says, I didn't do it, right? Okay, you didn't do it. You didn't sign a confession? No, didn't sign a confession. We get to the bond hearing, preliminary hearing, and I said, Your Honor, there's like very little evidence here. I think you should release my client on his own recognizance. Personal recognizance bond. And the district attorney says, Your Honor, we have a confession from Mr. X. I look at my client. And so I'm like, well, can I see this? Hands me the paper. At the top of the paper, it says statement. And what follows is, I did it. And I said, I thought you didn't confess. That's not a confession. That's a statement. What? I mean, you've met Labrador retrievers, you know? I wasn't going to win that case. If you've talked to the police and you've confessed, and they have it in writing in your signature there, I can be Johnny Cochran, and I'm not going to win that case. So it's very difficult to evaluate these kinds of things on win-loss ratio. Then there are lots of lawyers like my brother. My brother never goes to court. He's a tax attorney for Goldman Sachs. He never goes to court. How do you evaluate that? Right? I mean, what does he do? He is a tax attorney. In order to be my brother's client, you have to be worth a minimum of $50 million. Right? People who are worth $50 million don't go to the US tax court because they have people like my brother that keep them out of the tax court. But how do you evaluate what he does? Well, I mean, if they're happy, but I mean, it's a product of how much you can tolerate, how much risk you're willing to tolerate. You know, how aggressive do you want to be in filing your taxes to not pay any taxes? We know from some of the things that were released somehow from Donald Trump's tax records, which have not been released widely to the public yet, but we know somebody got a hold of 1 year that he paid less in federal income taxes than all of you, than any one of you. You know, now that's an aggressive tax attorney that he's got, or an aggressive accountant that's willing to take every deduction. But how do you sort of evaluate that? You see, it's difficult to evaluate. If you're diagnosed with cancer in the medical field, how do you evaluate? If you've got, you know, I mean, CTCA, one of my favorites to pick on. They have these wonderful ads. They've stopped putting Peggy, by the way, on the ad. So you may have seen these ads with Peggy. The first ad with Peggy was years ago, and I tried to find it on YouTube, and it's been taken down. Then there was the second ad, and I could still find that until a little while ago. Now I'm having a hard time finding the second ad. So the first ad with Peggy is, I went to my doctor, and he said, Peggy, you have pancreatic cancer. And I said, what do we do? And he said, Peggy, you're going to die. And then I went to CTCA, and I'm still here. And then they made a follow-up. Now, the truth of the matter is, if you have pancreatic cancer, probably, there are two types. The most common type, you're gonna die rather quickly. The second type may go into remission, as I understand it. I'm not a medical doctor, right? I have a doctor, but not a medical doctor. But as I understand it, and I have a cousin who's an oncologist who his specialty is pancreatic cancer, and he's a professor at the University of Texas. And he works his specialty in is in oncology. He's got both, he's what we call a mud fud, I'm what we call a judd fud. I have a JD, PhD, judd fud. He's a mud fud. MD, PhD, right? And then years later, they had this second ad with Peggy where she's like, it just feels so good to bring water to my horse. I'm still here. They stopped playing that ad because I think Peggy is probably gone off. You're probably not going to get out of this. But CTCA, if I were diagnosed with cancer, I would not go to CTCA. They're not, I'd be going to the Mayo Clinic, right? Or someplace else, that is really good. But how do you evaluate this? I mean, you may not live if you've got stage 4, pancreatic cancer. There may not be a good outcome for you. And are those doctors bad doctors? Compared to say very few people die of acne. Dermatologists have very, very low mortality statistics out there. How do you evaluate? It's really, really difficult to evaluate. Inconsistency. Tangible products may be good or bad, but with modern production techniques, they're usually consistent. McDonald's is not wonderful for the most part. Now, there are some things that I think McDonald's does really, really well. I think their French fries are probably the best, in terms of quality. I think they're just exceptionally good. But they are consistent. Maybe not great for you, but they are consistent. Services, on the other hand, you may be, and going back to a lawyer, you may be really, really great one day, and the next day, you've contracted COVID, you're running a fever of 101.5, and you're sort of delusional, you're dehydrated, and you may not be great. I mean, a Big Mac is 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onion on a sesame seed bun. It comes out pretty much the same no matter where you are, right? But I could be really, really good one day. I could get sick, I could have a bad day with my family, and you may not be on your game the next. So there's inconsistency. This makes pricing and promotion and delivery of services difficult. Now, organizations attempt to reduce inconsistency through standardization and training. So for example, Massage Envy. They go through a training program. What is the difference between a Swedish massage and, a hot stone massage? I mean, so they try to eliminate these inconsistencies through training, but every single person who wants to go for a massage is somewhat unique, and you can't completely standardize that. Now, obviously, there are some services that are easier to standardize. Dry cleaning services. That's pretty easy to standardize and avoid inconsistency. But anything that is not sort of that kind of lending itself to a routine mechanization, what are they doing with dry cleaning services? Well, you put, and by the way, it's not really dry cleaned. People think that you put it in this thing and it's all dry. No, it's actually dry clean. It's a fluid that washes the clothes. I don't know why they call it dry cleaning. I call it fluid cleaning. But you put it in, you take it out, and you press it, and hopefully it's consistent with the starch levels and things like that people want. But legal services are different. It's harder to standardize those. It's harder to standardize medical services because every individual is somewhat unique. Inseparability. Customers don't separate the delivery, the person who delivers the service, from the company themselves. This is one of the reasons why going back to Southwest Airlines and living the brand why they're so successful, because through their agents, they consistently project the same sort of core values that the company has, which means that people have overwhelmingly in customer surveys of satisfaction with Southwest Airlines, they have a really good opinion of Southwest. But the reason they have this good opinion is because of those agents that they've had these high touch point contacts with. They're speaking with this consistent voice. You don't separate that good time out from the company itself. If you have a miserable experience, which I've had multiple miserable experiences with, say, American Airlines, you project that miserable experience onto the company itself that you had with the service or the gate agent. It's hard to separate the provider, the actual person who provides it, from the company. And the interaction is dependent upon the extent to the customer has to be present in order to perform the service. And the more you have to be present, the less you're going to be able to separate out. Dry cleaning services, you probably don't have a whole lot of interaction with the people who do it, and you may have no interaction with the actual people who do it. A lot of times, so the place I drop off my dry cleaning now in Guthrie, they send they bag it up, so the person who gives me back my clothes is not the person who probably pressed the clothes. I have no contact with those people. So I'm not projecting if they're having a bad day or whatever, I'm not projecting onto them. The only person I see is the person who actually hands them to me, right? So in Guthrie, the place I take my dry cleaning, that person is just basically a checkout clerk or a receiving clerk. They just take the clothes, they put them in a bag, and they send them off to a central place in Oklahoma City that processes them, and then they ship it back to Guthrie. That didn't used to be the case. It used to be the person who handed you clothes was probably also in the back doing the clothes. That was the first dry cleaners that I went to in Guthrie. They went out of business, but there was actually somebody, because they couldn't compete with the size and scope of these companies that are doing this in a centralized location. I would see the guy's name was Charles, who worked there. He would come out sweating because it's hot and you can't really air condition those kinds of businesses because of the machinery. And he'd actually been back there, throwing things into a dry cleaning machine and then pressing and doing that and then taking clothes. I don't do that. So if you can separate the provider, you may not have this as much of an issue, but to the extent you have to be present for a massage, you can't sort of not be present for that. That's not a service that you can separate out the provider from the company, because you're there through the entire process, right? Unlike dry cleaning services. Inventory costs. Inventory for products is dependent upon the perishability of the product. If I have a can of green beans and I'm a grocer, and that can of green beans doesn't sell today, I can always sell it tomorrow. And I may be out, the time and shelf space and stuff like that, but I can always sell it. As a lawyer, I can't get my inventory costs back. Right now, I am not practicing law. I am teaching you about services marketing. I cannot get this hour and 15 minutes back. If I'm not billing, I'm not making money and I can't get it back. Unlike that can of green beans, which I can sell tomorrow, I can't get this time back, ever. Right? So you have these inventory cost problems, and what you try not to have is idle capacity. If you're an attorney, if you're a law firm, and you're paying associates who have not made partners, so they're not being paid based on the percentage of ownership that they have in the firm, you're paying them a salary. You need them to be billing enough to make their salary and make you money. And you don't want any idle capacity. You don't, if you don't have clients coming in the door and you're still paying them, you're idle. And you'll never get back today by working tomorrow, right? I mean, you can't. The time is long. And so you try to avoid this inventory problem. So the services continuum. Many companies are not clearly a product-based company or a service, purely a service, but they're usually a mixture of both. So with regard to things like the Dell laptop that's right in front of me I'm using to broadcast on YouTube, that's a product, but it also comes with services, right? Like warranties. And if something happens to it, now in reality, because Windows boxes are so cheap, if something happens to that, probably the school is going to trash it and go buy another one. It used to be that people would actually send them off, or they'd have somebody come out and fix the computer. But generally speaking, the biggest thing that goes wrong with computers like that is what? What's the biggest thing that goes wrong with laptops? I mean, other than at some point in time, they just become old and they become clunky and you just need to get a new one. But what happens with laptops? What's probably the biggest thing that happens with a laptop? You what? You drop it. That's exactly right. You drop it, and when you drop it, what happens? It breaks the screen. That's the biggest thing that happens with laptops is the screen gets broken, you drop it, and so now you've got to replace the screen. Actually, nobody does that on these. The first laptop I bought, you would have done that. You would have had somebody, you would have called the company, and they would have had some service center that they would have you take it to, particularly if you bought a warranty on it, and they would fix the screen because they were enormously expensive. Again, I think the first laptop that my family bought for me when I went to college was something like, I don't know, $1,800 at the time. If you drop it, you do that with Mac books, people will actually fix them because they're so expensive. But with that, a couple $100, they're probably just going to pull the data off of it that you can recover and just get a new box, right? But so there's a service component with this. Something goes wrong. Let's say it's not just dropped. Let's say you just get the Dell, they send it to you, and it just doesn't quite work right. And so you send it back, and they send you a new one, or they repair the processor, or whatever goes wrong with it. That's a product. There's also a service aspect to it, right? Now, this becomes important because when you're dealing with things, this is an example of how in the environmental scan, how these sort of things interact and come together. We talked about the legal and regulatory environment. So with regard to products, one of the things that applies to products is something called the implied warranty of merchantability. What does that mean? Well, it means that every product that's manufactured comes with what's called the implied warranty of merchantability, that it is reasonably fit for the purpose unto which you are going to put it, to use it, right? So this chair, I'll pull this chair out. Let's see if I can get it up. It's got a base with 5 casters. For those of you who are on the extended section and can't see it, it's these black chairs that we have in the classroom. They swivel. I think they tilt. These don't tilt, do they? Do they tilt? What is it made for? Well, it's made to sit in. It should be reasonably sturdy to hold somebody and not break. If it breaks, well, then, because you're sitting in it and it just falls apart, there's an implied warranty of merchantability. Now, with regard to services and mixed product companies, depending on whether or not it's primarily a service or whether it's primarily a product that you're purchasing, the implied warranty of merchantability may or may not apply. So most companies are mixed. The computer, as I suggested, has a manufacturer's warranty. There's the implied warranty of merchantability. It should be reasonably fit. What happens if it doesn't? Well, you can recover under that, right? But if something is a court determines that it's primarily a service and not a product, then the implied warranty of merchantability may not apply, and you may have an issue collecting if something goes wrong. Well, let's think about this. What kinds of things could we have where they might find that it was primarily a service and the implied warranty of merchantability doesn't apply? Well, clearly, if you go to the store and you buy steak, and you get food poisoning from that steak that you took home and cooked, let's say something really serious, like E. coli, which by the way, you generally don't get E. coli from meat anymore. The biggest sources of E. coli are on leafy vegetables. Okay? But let's suppose you buy a steak, you get home and you get E. coli because they haven't processed the meat appropriately. Can you sue everyone in the distribution chain under a theory of implied warranty and merchantability? I think you can. Your steak gave me E. coli, I suffered damages, I'm gonna sue under this theory. Now, let's suppose that you didn't buy the steak from Homeland, let's suppose you bought the steak from a restaurant. Does the implied warranty and merchantability apply? Or is it primarily a service that you bought? If it's primarily a service, it may not be applicable. Why do you go to a restaurant? Is it primarily for the product, or is it primarily for the service?
I feel like it's more
The
for the
product.
service.
You think it's what?
I feel like it's more for the service.
You think it's more for the service. Why?
Because maybe that's wrong. Like, you're going, I don't know. Like the food's not always the best.
Uh-huh.
You have to cook this food.
You don't have to cook.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's, you don't have to cook it. Right? I think it's primarily, I would argue that, you know, if I were defending this, I'd say there's no implied warranty merchantability. You were buying a service. What you wanted was the convenience of not having to cook. That's what you wanted. It wasn't really a product. You wanted convenience. You were buying convenience. Right? So it's a continuum. And when we evaluate mixed things like the Dell computer, like the restaurant, it's a continuum. So is the company's core offerings products or services? Google has products. We talked about this last time. Google has a Google Pixel phone, right? That is a tangible product, but mostly, and most of their service offerings are service-based. Whereas Dell has services, they have repair services. If you get into their corporate stuff and you're buying server capacity or things like that, it's primarily maybe a service that you're buying, but they're primarily a tangible product, right? So distinguishing between the core product, which is, it has services that are tangential to that product, versus a service which may have products that are associated. So as a lawyer, one of the things I may do is I may give you tangible products of my work, but that's not the primary thing. So as a service provider, as a lawyer, one of the things that I've done in the past is I've done wills, trusts, and estates. So this is not going to court part of practicing law, for the most part, until somebody dies, right? You come to me, you want to plan the way you're going to settle your affairs in the future when you're no longer around, which by the way, most people don't do this. Most people, including lawyers, die what we call intestate, because it's like most people don't want to think about their own death, particularly not when you're sort of young, right? But you can die at any time. You can get hit by a bus tomorrow, and you should think about these things. So you come to me, and I may give you a product. So let's say you come to me for estate planning. I'm going to give you a tangible product, but it's not really the product that you want. What is that tangible product that I'm going to hand you? Unlike defending somebody for murder charges, where it's completely a performance, right? It's completely me. I'm not going to give them any tangible products for the most part with my client. They're in jail. They're probably not going to let me give them things. And that's not what they want. What they want is they want me to stand up, cross-examine witnesses, and prove that they're not guilty. There's no tangibility to that. But other aspects of the law are tangible. So I'm going to give you come to me for estate planning, and I say, well, let's suppose that you're one of my brother's clients who's worth $50 million. Well, you need a will, and I'm going to tell you why you need a will. But we should also probably discuss a trust. And what you want is you want to put most of your assets in this trust. And the reason you need a will, even if you have a trust, is because you'll forget to put something in there. You'll continue living and you'll buy things and you'll forget to put those assets into the trust. And then you have to have some way of disposing with them. But by and large, let's say you're worth $50 million. You don't want to go through probate because probate is public. You don't want everybody to know your business, or when you're dead, to know your kid's business and what they're getting. And it's expensive to go through probate. So let's put all of this stuff in a trust. I will give you a tangible product, which is a trust document. And I will file a memorandum of trust with the appropriate agency so that people know that this is a trust and that all of this stuff will pass outside the probative estate. And that's a tangible thing, but you don't really want the tangible thing. What you want is what that tangible thing represents, which is an abstract idea, which is this is going to make my life or my kids' lives easier when I'm no longer here. You're paying for a peace of mind, not the actual piece of paper that I give you, right? So that's primarily a service. Dell is primarily a product company. They produce these tangible things that have services that are tangential to that product. Whereas a lawyer may give you products, but those are tangential to the thought behind that, these intangible ideas that go into it, right? And how we evaluate that is going to depend on whether or not it's, how we feel about that, how we assess our quality as service providers is going to largely depend on what kind of continuum are we talking about. Is it primarily products? Dell makes really good products, right? I think. People seem to be happy with Dell overwhelmingly. They're fairly popular. Maybe not as popular as they once were, but they're good products. But its services are sort of tangential to that. It's easier to evaluate. So classifying services can also help us in identifying the way we evaluate services and we think about them. So we can classify services towards methods of delivery. Are they delivered by people? If they're delivered primarily by people, it's going to be harder to standardize them than if they're delivered by equipment, which is like electricity, e-trading, online banking, things like that we can evaluate really well. It's a purely service, but it's easy to evaluate, isn't it? Because you can either get onto your E-Trade account and buy GameStop. How many of you saw this news item that's been going on? So there's all these now sort of exotic investment vehicles that people use, and some little guys decided that they were going to try and screw over large-time investors, right? And they got on social media and they were driving the price of some stocks up that didn't make much sense because other people had shorted it, right? And this is complex. I don't have time to go into the whole thing. But what ended up happening is the trading companies started noticing this trend, and all of a sudden they stopped your ability to trade. And people got really upset by this because it's equipment based largely, right? I mean, and they just stopped it. And so you weren't able to trade in these things. That's an objective thing. I could either get in and get the trades I wanted or I couldn't. That's largely equipment based. People based, it's harder. If I go to my broker and I have to go through him in the olden days before you could get online and do these sorts of things simply, he could have all kinds of excuses for why I didn't get the trades made that you wanted. Maybe they're legitimate, maybe they're not. And it's harder to evaluate those things than it is if you've got something that is like a purely service. And they just shut it down. They just shut trading down. And people were upset. They were really, really hot about this. We can also classify services as profit for nonprofit, governmental sponsored, things like federal, state, local, the US Postal Service, fire, police, and they all want to, because government requires the buy-in of citizens at some level, they want to have at least the appearance of good service providing. How do you qualify or quantify one unit of police service? It's really, really difficult, right? So methods of delivery and classifying services will also impact how we evaluate them, how we think about them. We can also look at how consumers purchase those services. Prior to purchase, how do they go about that? So successful service companies, the ones that are really good, like Southwest Airlines, that live the brand, they understand how consumers purchase their products or their services. They understand that. They understand how consumers go about that purchase process. The hotel industry, for years and years and years, if you wanted a hotel reservation, if you were traveling, you pretty much either booked your hotel in advance by calling the hotel or by just stopping in. If you're traveling along the road, you get tired, you stop in and say, do you have any use? You see the vacancy sign out and you say, I need a room for the night. Now hotel companies like Marriott realize that most people do their booking for all of this stuff. How? We've gone from booking online or booking in person or on phone to booking online. So how is it that our customers are purchasing our services? That's going to be important. They understand how customers evaluate their services. They understand what they're looking for by doing some market research. And then they determine how to present differential advantages relative to competing offerings. What makes Marriott different from Hilton? They understand where they are in the market, and they understand where Hilton is in the market, and they differentiate. How do they differentiate? Marriott does a lot of things that Hilton doesn't.
Isn't Marriott, I feel like they had like fresh baked cookies at one point.
That's DoubleTree, and that's a Hilton property.
Okay.
That was DoubleTree's thing that they did, is that they gave you these warm baked chocolate chip and nut cookies when you arrived, and it's sort of like a hallmark of there, and that's the way they, people love those cookies. If you've ever had one, they are like exceptionally. I don't like sweets, and I actually like those cookies. But Marriott does some things like, for example, Marriott was founded by the Marriott family, and Bill Marriott really, really took the company to a huge degree of success. They're Mormons. What do Mormons not do? They don't drink. But Marriott has good bars because they recognize that a big portion of their entertainment and their hospitality was dependent on that. Marriott also recognized, Bill Marriott, he's a Mormon, recognized that Jewish people spend an enormous amount of money, not just on weddings, but on things like bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. My sister-in-law, when she was bat mitzvah, so my brother knew his now ex-wife since they were 6 years old. When she was bat mitzvah, her family, her father is a doctor. He's a full professor at OU. They spent, and this was in the 1980s, the late 80s, they spent $50,000 on her bat mitzvah. Now, in order to do that, you have to have a kosher kitchen. Who has a kosher kitchen? The only hotel in Oklahoma City that had a kosher kitchen was Marriott. All big, full-service Marriotts have a kosher kitchen. Hilton didn't have that. It's how you differentiate, right, yourself in the marketplace. So how do you have a competitive advantage? Understanding how consumers purchase things like that. That's one of the things that Marriott understood that maybe Hilton didn't, or maybe Hilton didn't feel like it was worth it to have that. Assessing service quality. So customers compare their expectations about a service to what their expectation is with their actual experience. And then they look for differences. And how do we identify what those differences are, and how do we fix them? Well, we do it through a gap analysis on factors such as reliability. How does a lawyer fix their problems if they've got problems? Well, be reliable. If you tell people, I will contact you or I will call you back within X number of hours, do that. I will return emails within X number of hours, do that. To the extent that you have tangible products, make sure that those are quality, right? Make sure that when you produce the will, that, you know, I think I told you all that I rehab small mammals. I've rehabbed a lot of squirrels. Currently, I have 2 prairie dogs. They like to chew on stuff, you know, so I don't want them in my law office, and I'm not handing somebody the will that's been chewed on by the prairie dog, right? Make sure that you've got, you know, that there's not coffee stains on it, that it looks, you know, professional. Responsiveness. Say what you mean what you say, and do what you say you're going to do. And this is where a lot of lawyers get into trouble, in my experience, is that they don't respond to their clients in a timely fashion. Assurance. You know, give your client the assurance that you're going to be there for them. And this relates to empathy, the last one. People prefer to do business with somebody that they think understands them. It's hard to do. It's hard for me when I practiced criminal law to be really empathetic. It's maybe one of the reasons why I didn't do it for very long. You know, I came from a solidly upper middle class family. Both my parents have degrees, advanced degrees. My mother's an entrepreneur. My father was an FBI agent. Like, you know, I mean, it's hard for me to relate to a criminal. My father was an FBI agent, right? And so, you know, it's hard to empathize. But, you know, if you're going to be successful at this, you have to be able to do it, or try, or at least, you know, fake it until you make it, with empathy. So any questions about services? All right, so again, for those of you who got ducks, I will update the points just now. For those of you that texted me, I will do that as well right now. Next week, you have the week to work on your article reviews. Again, if you want me to look at an article that you found and you're not sure about the source, things like, again, Forbes magazine, Newsweek, Time, the Wall Street Journal, those are all legitimate sources. But if you find something that you're questioning, you know, send me a text with the link in it. I'll look at it, and I should be able to get back to you pretty quickly on that. So you have next week to do that. So we will not be meeting, so you don't have to get up at the crack of dawn. Although since the days are getting longer, the crack of dawn actually is about 6 o'clock. I realize most of you are not up at that. I'm up at 5, so dawn starts around 6 now. But you don't have to get up quite so early, so enjoy that. If you've already turned in your article review, which a couple of you have, well, then you have a nice spring break that I provided you, since the university cut yours out. Yes?
Is there like a specific format that you follow, like APA and all?
No, I don't care. And since you give me the URL to just put the URL at the bottom, or just send it in the message part of the Dropbox. You can do either of those. I don't require, you know, I mean, unless you have more than one source. So, I mean, if you're just using the article itself, if you directly quote it, then you need to put quotes around it, but you don't have to use it here. Other questions? All right, well, enjoy your article review week, and I will see you guys the following week. Have a good morning. Enjoy the rest of your morning. If you feel cheated because it's only 9:05, you let me know, and when we come back, I'll keep you all 10 minutes late. All right?